This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Tonight's lead story, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad confirmed today that he has been informed of Israel's willingness to withdraw from the Golan Heights in exchange for peace with Syria. Assad told the Al-Watan newspaper that the message was conveyed to him a week ago by the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Erdogan, who has been mediating between Jerusalem and Damascus. Assad said there will be no secret negotiations and any talks will be held by way of Turkey. Erdogan is scheduled to visit Damascus on Saturday to continue his discussions with Assad. Meanwhile, right-wing opposition Knesset members, joined by several from the Prime Minister's own Kadima party, are planning to table legislation that would require a national referendum before Israel gives up the Golan Heights. And in a related story, the U.S. Congress is beginning hearings on the recent Israeli attacks on an alleged Syrian nuclear site. Officials here are worried that the press briefings following the hearings may expose Israeli state secrets. IBA's Dennis In brings us the details.
It's still unclear exactly what video the U.S. administration is going to release later today, but according to the Washington Post, the pictures will show North Korean nuclear technicians working inside a reactor in northern Syria before it was destroyed 7 months ago. The report states that the video was received from Israeli intelligence and clearly proves that North Korea was exporting nuclear technology to Syria. The presentation will be embarrassing for Pyongyang and Damascus because up to now both countries have vigorously denied any such cooperation. Syria declared the area out of bounds to international nuclear inspectors immediately after Israeli jets destroyed the site on September the 6th, and then went on to construct a building on the very same spot. The release of the video is problematic for Israel too. Although it demonstrates Israel's superior intelligence gathering capabilities, the publication could put an entire intelligence infrastructure at risk. Up to now, it was believed that the video evidence that Israel based its assessments on was obtained from the air. However, following the revelations of the congressional hearing, we may learn that Israeli agents or even IDF soldiers had gained access to the facility before the aerial operation. Some here are also worried that the hearings may jeopardize recent Israel-Syrian peace overtures or even force an embarrassed Damascus to launch a revenge attack. It appears from the American press today that as far as the U.S. administration is concerned, the imminent revelation has little to do with Syria and Israel and much to do with a conflict inside the Congress over the removal of sanctions against Korea. Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
The federal prosecutor in the case of convicted Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard said that the case of bin Ami Kadish, who is suspected of spying for Israel 23 years ago, proves that Israel lied when it announced that it had no other spies in the United States. The prosecutor, Joseph Dianva, said the Kadish case proves that other Americans working in top security military installations were probably called upon by Israel to perform similar acts of espionage. The editor of the Jewish newspaper from Kadish's home state of New Jersey, Andrew Silo Carroll, has been closely following developments in the case, and he told IBA's Eli Waggalanter today that Kadish is just a regular retiree in the community.
Andrew Silo Carroll, what can you tell us about Ben Ami Kadish?
The one thing you can tell about Mr. Kadish is what you can tell about him. As far as we know, he was a typical Jewish retiree, living in a typical Jewish retirement community in central New Jersey. We joked about him. If you were to make a movie of it, this would be the Spy War walking shoes. This is a guy who retired, is very supportive of Israel, runs a little fundraiser every year in his backyard for various pro-Israel causes. And, it's his he's so typical that there's almost nothing else you can say except this incredible charge that it surfaced, I guess, 20, 23 years after the fact.
What are his friends saying, his neighbors saying, the people in his congregation?
We talked to his cantor, who runs the synagogue in Concordia, where he worships, and they were just shocked. Again, they just saw him as just another of the kind of white-haired folks who come and, try to spend their quiet years in a retirement.
Humanitarian relief is the newest casualty of the siege over Gaza. This evening, the United Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, decided to suspend its operations in Gaza. The decision was involuntary, but was a result of a shortage of fuel. Thus, one of the most active distributors of international aid to the Palestinians, which supplied them with food, healthcare, and education, is now closed. Zuhair Saqalla reports from Gaza.
The Israeli siege over Gaza has touched all aspects of life. It does not just threaten the current lives of citizens, but also has started to destroy their future. The complaint by the United Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, might be the biggest proof of this. Due to the shortage of fuel, the agency will suspend all of its services and will no longer address citizens' needs, particularly in the refugee camps.
We'll just eat tar. It's all up to God, and so be it.
This siege affects the people. It's unjust. How long can we remain this way?
There are many people who depend on the organization's aid. Now that it is closed, what will these people do? Steal? Rob?
People in difficult living conditions frequent the relief agency for any kind of aid, including healthcare, education, and food supplies. The agency took care of the camps in Gaza, and if they stop, the fate of the citizens will be grim.
Hundreds of thousands will be affected by this decision, which was imposed on UNRWA and not their desire. The UNRWA is willing to restart its operations and distribution if fuel immediately enters into Gaza.
Crises pile upon crises, and the suffering of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is on a thorn-paved road to an inescapable pit. All aspects of life are paralyzed. When international relief organizations reach a standstill, it suggests that the Israeli siege has succeeded in creating irreversible devastation. And yet with all this, no one seems to hear and no one listens. Zuhair Saqalla, Dubai TV, Gaza.
In spite of the terrible situation in Gaza, it does not compare to the Nazi Holocaust, according to the Western ambassadors at the United Nations. This comparison was made yesterday by the Libyan envoy at the UN Security Council discussion, Ambassador Jadallah Talhi. He likened the situation in Gaza to the Nazi concentration camps in World War II. This was enough to make the envoy of France withdraw from the session. He was followed by a number of Western envoys. The Council was discussing the humanitarian situation of Gaza's citizens. The session was closed after the walkout. In addition to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, there is also the carnage by Israeli military aircrafts. This morning, a Palestinian civilian was martyred and at least 7 others were injured in an airstrike that hit a home in Beit Hanun. The attack targeted members from Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades. It was one of 2 operations carried out this morning in the towns of Balda and Khan Yunis. The raids coincided with a wide Israeli incursion that included about 30 military machines.
إسرائيلية واسعة شاركت فيها نحو 30 آلية عسكرية.
Welcome to the program. A ceasefire between Israel and Hamas could be getting closer. Hamas is expected to give Egypt details of the proposed truce on Thursday. The possible deal could alleviate the humanitarian situation in Gaza. On the ground, there are increasing concerns after the United Nations said it would no longer be able to deliver foodstuffs after running out of fuel. The Hamas-controlled territory suffers from severe fuel shortages. Hamas blames the shortage on Israel. But there's also been a strike by petrol station owners. And as David Chater reports, it's Gazans who are paying the price.
The United Nations says the humanitarian conditions in Gaza are now quite simply appalling. Crushing sanctions have stripped the civilian population here of any dignified existence, they say. The already desperate situation has now been compounded by the lack of diesel or benzene for vehicles. The fleet of lorries used by the UN to distribute food has now run out of fuel.
UNRWA yesterday decided to stop all the food distribution all over Gaza Strip because within few hours UNRWA will run out of fuel, and it means that the trucks, the cars, and all the vehicles that UNRWA are using will not be moving more in the Gaza Strip. That decision will affect nearly 1 million people.
A 55-year-old farmer was killed in the early hours of the morning when an Israeli armored column stormed into Bet Hanun. His house received a direct hit from an artillery shell. Hamas say big progress has been made in negotiations with Egypt to arrange a temporary ceasefire, covering only the Gaza Strip initially, in exchange for the siege being lifted by Israel.
According to our response, the ball now is in the Israeli court.
In an Israeli airstrike overnight, 3 Palestinian resistance fighters were targeted in the south of the Gaza Strip near Khan Yunis. The UN say 20% of ambulances are now completely out of fuel. Another 60% have supplies that will run out in less than a week. Fuel reserves at hospitals have now dropped below the critical level, and the central pharmacy has run out of fuel for refrigeration. The United Nations has appealed to Hamas to stop all the attacks against the crossing points into Gaza, which it described as deeply disturbing. It also condemned the deliberate targeting of civilians by the firing of rockets into Israel. It equally condemned the civilian deaths caused by Israeli military operations here and the Israelis' collective punishment of the civilian population here. David Chater, Al Jazeera, Gaza City.
Earlier, we spoke to Hamas spokesman Ghazi Hamed. He said the deal will aim to begin with improving the situation in Gaza first.
First, we are talking about comprehensive and mutual ceasefire in the whole Palestinian territory. But according to some information, may Hamas accept to start in Gaza, and after that we can move to the West Bank, maybe because Gaza is living under a dangerous siege and the blockade, and situation is disaster and is going worse and worse. So we may start in Gaza, but I think the key condition for this ceasefire that Israel should reopen all the crossings, especially the Rafah crossings, in order to allow people to move in and out, and also the goods, and to lift the embargo on the Palestinian people. Because without opening the crossing or lifting, there will be no means for the ceasefire.
An exhibit under the title The Future Thirst opened recently. The art paintings in this exhibit were done by Palestinian artist Marwan Al-Allan and sponsored by Hydrologist Association as a message to the world about future water problems, especially in Palestine.
Palestinian artist Marwan Al-Allan joined the ongoing war over water with his brush. Under the title, The Future Thirst, he exhibited his art paintings which portray water shortages and pollution in Palestinian territories.
There are two main ideas. The local struggle against the occupation, which has always stolen and polluted Palestinian water. The other idea has to do with global pollution and damage to the environment.
These images show the reality we live in, pertaining to water shortages and the environment.
Water is another point of contention between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It has been a topic of negotiations during all the peace negotiations. The Palestinians believe that Israel, which has a great deal of control over Palestinian water resources, is depriving them from using water in their homes and on their agricultural lands.
As you know, the occupation controls 80% of the Palestinian water resources, and it legislates laws pertaining to how the Palestinians are allowed to use the water. Currently, the water that the Palestinians get in both the West Bank and Gaza is less than 20% of the rainwater that falls on the Palestinian territories. The occupation is the major factor causing the water problems in the Palestinian territories.
Political analysts believe that the Israeli settlements in the Palestinian territories are the main reason behind the environmental deterioration. They also say that water is an important part of the occupied Arab lands, which explains why it has been a central issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The theme of the Future Thirst exhibit by the Palestinian artist addresses a matter of survival and of a future concern. At the same time, Israel's constant war to control water resources stems from the fact that water is a source of concern to the Israelis as well. Rima Mustafa, Occupied Ramallah.
العين الإسرائيلية أهلا بكم. المستقبل سيكون أخطر.
The future will be more dangerous and weapons are rolling in to Hezbollah and Hamas. They're making fun of us, the type of sarcasm that causes pain. What is this falling on us? Is it an earthquake, Shihab, or Qadr? These are the names of Iranian missiles that will be used to cause death and destruction in Israel. Such missiles were displayed today during a celebration of National Army Day in Iran. Banners reading, "Preparations have been completed and we are stronger," were posted along the area of the demonstration. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State came to the region looking for someone who would believe her. She called for the formation of a regional front against Iran in order to protect national interests. Israel is standing on the line of hostility, spying even against the one who brought two enemies together and were to overthrow a history of animosity. With it, a thorny path of surrender was created, dragging with it the legacy of an entire nation. Not to forget those conveying the truth who were burned in the fire of enemy tanks, which couldn't stand the thought of someone pulling the mask off the executor who even violated the rights of those massacred. Mohammed Mansour, a researcher of Israeli affairs, is our guest on today's show. Mr. Mansour came from Damascus to join us. Welcome to the show. The internal Israeli front is preoccupied with anything emerging out of neighboring Syria. The political leadership in Israel is standing indecisively in between two options. On one side, Israel is making preparations for a war with Syria. On the other side, Israel is exerting efforts to reopen channels of negotiations with Damascus. Parallel to that, the lecture given last week by the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad enjoyed unprecedented attention by Israeli media. However, this Israeli attention didn't distract Tel Aviv from keeping one eye open on its Iranian enemy, which was celebrating the birth of its army, an army that has been a source of worries to the Israeli public. It's the same old analogy. The Israelis need the Syrians to confront the Iranians, whether peacefully or militarily. Here is Channel 2.
Hoping that we will sing soon from a podium in Damascus. We are singing here today.
This is what happened yesterday in Majd al-Shams in the Golan, where affectionate songs were devoted to the Damascus regime. During the evacuation day of the French forces from Syria, calls for the liberation of the Golan Heights were announced in the Golan in Syria. While the residents of Majd al-Shams celebrated the event by singing and dancing, Damascus played national songs. The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad couldn't attend the celebrations held by the Druze community in Sawaida. Instead, he gave a lecture before a group of scholars and thinkers in Damascus. In his speech, al-Assad said they are preparing for a war with Israel. He added, while the possibility for a war with Israel is there, an imminent war is not likely at this time. There appears to be a debate whether or not Israel is intending to launch an attack on Lebanon and Syria, and whether the U.S. is intending to attack Iran. Al-Assad further said that Israel at one point during its war on Lebanon wanted to end the war, but the U.S. administration advised against it. In brief, Al-Assad means that Syria is continuing to strengthen its capabilities, but it will not rush into an adventure. Al-Assad's statement coincided with a celebration in Tehran, marking Iranian National Army Day. In the opening ceremonies, the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, and the Iranian President Ahmadinejad confirmed that their country is capable of countering any attacks launched against it. In addition, a military parade, which included a demonstration by Iranian warplanes and helicopters, was held in Tehran. Most of the aircrafts that took part in the maneuvers were from the old F-4 and F-5 series, which go back in production to the 1960s and 1970s. Such warplanes are in no position to reach Israel. The Iranians displayed an array of missiles, including the improved Earthquake series, which was supplied to Hezbollah. The new missiles are Qatar 1 and 2, which are the new version of the Shihab 3, with a range that could reach any part of the state of Israel. Qatar 1 and 2 are equipped with dynamic warheads, presumably making them more lethal.
This is
how the Israeli eye looked and examined two occasions: the evacuation of the French mandate from Syria and the Army Day in Iran. The report talked about several issues. Let's start by talking about the Syrian issue. The report outlined the Syrian president's speech but chose certain phrases to highlight. Among the phrases highlighted in al-Assad's speech was his remark in which he said that the Arabs are renewing their young adult, whereas Israel has reached its retirement age. This is what al-Assad said, or what was attributed to him by Channel 2. How can you interpret this Israeli view of what happened in Majd al-Shams and on the Syrian side of the Golan?
أي شيء في المنطقة، أي رئيس، أي دولة، أي نظام، إسرائيل تنظر إليه كعدو.
First, regarding Israeli policy, Israel always acts in a hostile way towards everything and everyone in the region, including any country, any regime, or any president. Since the creation of the Israeli entity, Israel has never looked at any country as a country of peace. At one point in time, Israel warplanes shelled the headquarters of Yasser Arafat in Tunisia. This means that the Israeli entity always considers any country in the world that does not agree with its policy as an enemy and treats it as such. The statements made by His Excellency, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, in which he said that we are preparing ourselves for a war with Israel, does not mean that Syria is a hostile country. Syria is not a military state that seeks to expand and carry out aggressions. I remember during 1973 and amidst the October War, the late Syrian President Hafez al-Assad said on the third day of the war, "We do not have a hobby of killing and destroying." He further said, "We are defending ourselves against the killing and the destruction, and we are peace advocates." However, Israel is an aggressive and hostile state which seeks to expand at the expense of others. During a meeting with the Central Committee of the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, His Excellency Bashar al-Assad said 2 days ago that Syria, in principle, always seeks peace. By the same token, Syria will not accept to be portrayed as weak. Therefore, Syria will always continue to prepare itself and build its capabilities.
لكن في نفس الوقت هي لا تقبل أن تكون ضعيفة. سوريا دائما تهيئ نفسها، تهيئ جاهزيتها.
The leader of Pakistan's Taliban, Bitala Masoon, called on his followers in southern Waziristan to stop launching attacks in Pakistan. A government official said that this is a confidence-building measure and part of a peace process that began between what he called local extremists.
The agreement aims at transforming the cooling-off period between the Pakistani Taliban and the government, which was reached many months ago, to a permanent peace agreement in Pakistan.
It appears that the Pakistani tribal area is entering a new era. The Pakistani Taliban released a statement saying that it has stopped all its military operations. The statement comes after reaching an initial agreement, which was the first to be signed by an elected government. The Pakistani Taliban accuses the Pakistani government of being involved in the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, who was supposed to preside over this government. The Pakistani army vowed to support steps taken by the government.
الجيش الباكستاني يجدد تعهده بدعم خطوات الحكومة.
Now we have also known this.
We have known about Bitala Masoon's announcement about stopping the armed operations from the media. In any case, the army follows what the government decides. As soon as we receive orders from the government, we will fulfill them.
The agreement received large tribal and popular support, as one can see in this survey captured by Al Jazeera's camera.
We are hoping that a lot of good things will be done by this government. Thank God we hope to achieve peace. We demand that the government's decisions will not be only ink on paper.
The political parties that boycotted the elections support the government's new policy, which was evident when Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyya received a tribal delegation.
I strongly support a ceasefire. I think that the U.S. and Pakistan must stop this war. They must solve tribal problems only through negotiations.
Islamabad was supposed to send representatives from its newly elected government abroad to explain the new government's policies and political orientation. Instead, the Pakistani government was transformed into a magnet for international officials. There is a concern that this agreement may translate into more attacks on NATO forces in Afghanistan. While the Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf, Washington's main ally in the so-called war on terror, is quiet when it comes to negotiations with armed tribal groups, Washington is worried about the effects of all these agreements on the Pakistani efforts in the so-called war on terror. Ahmed Zaidan, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
Ahmed Zaidan, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
تشهد الحدود التركية المتاخمة للعراق وإيران تحركات
The borders along Iraq, Iran and Turkey are witnessing a heavy deployment by the Turkish forces which are pursuing the PKK. This military deployment comes after 3 Turkish soldiers were killed in southeastern Turkey.
This dangerous escalation is a warning that the security period in Turkey is coming to an end. A large number of Turkish soldiers were injured by the Kurdish rebels in southeastern Turkey. The Turkish army announced that 3 Turkish soldiers, including an officer, were killed by a landmine that was planted by the Kurdish rebels in southeastern Turkey. This comes amidst a high level of tension along the Iraqi-Turkish border. There are predictions being made that Turkey may carry out a wide-scale military operation in northern Iraq as part of the ongoing war between the Turkish forces and the PKK. Tensions increased during the past few days as Turkey escalated its military operations. Political analysts believe that Turkey is waiting for an opportunity to intervene militarily in areas that fall under the control of the Kurds in northern Iraq.
As we know, Kurdish rebels killed 3 Turkish soldiers. Therefore, the visit by the Iraqi Deputy Chief of Staff is very important at this time. Today, America is there, but tomorrow, Turkey will deal directly with Iraq. This necessitates cooperation between Turkey and Iraq to end any kind of tension along the borders between the 2 neighbors.
In a related topic, the Turkish army continued to amass its troops in the southeastern areas along the borders between Iran and Iraq. Meanwhile, Turkish special forces are carrying out nightly search operations to locate the rebels' hideouts. These developments came as the Iraqi Deputy Chief of Staff, Nasser Obeidi, continues his discussions with senior Turkish officials to strengthen relations between the 2 countries. Political observers believe that tension along the borders between northern Iraq and southern Turkey may escalate, especially after the recent military escalation between the Turkish soldiers and members of the PKK. Rami Adel Ali, Al-Iraqiya, Istanbul.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.